Welcome to Functional Philosophy. I'm Charles Tew. That's T as in tango, E as in echo, and W as in whiskey. This is episode number 30, and its title is Nazis, Muslims, and Nihilists, the Combatants in the Melee for the World. Hello everyone. Just a warning up front, this episode you may find depressing. But don't be too depressed. I don't regard what I'm going to say in this episode as dire from the perspective of your individual life, and I will explain why probably in next week's episode. So, if this puts you in a bad state of mind, and you trust my judgment, just know that good news is coming soon. Now, the path a culture takes, a society takes, is dictated by the ideas it holds. You can see this throughout history. Greece was the way it was because of the worldview that Homer established. The Middle Ages in Europe were the way they were because of the worldview that Christianity established with the Bible. There's often a touchstone book involved, a common reference point for a civilization. That would be the Iliad and the Odyssey for Greece, and the Bible for Christendom. So, what ideas are prominent today, and where is the world likely to go in the future? Well, the way I see it, there are three major factions vying for domination. And you know what those are from the title of this episode. So let's start with the current establishment, the status quo. That is the Nihilists. These are the social justice advocates you are familiar with. These are people like Obama. This is the worldview, the philosophy that dominates government, academia, all cultural production. Books for a long time, movies more recently, and now video games and comic books and more superficial things. Now, if you've listened to me long enough or you know Ayn Rand, then you know that this worldview comes from Immanuel Kant. And if you are familiar with Leonard Peikoff's work, then you know that we are today living in an unprecedented time in history. You know, it's true in some ways we live in the best time in history, but everything that's good is a result of the past, and all progress is a result of the fumes of the Enlightenment. The trend, where we are going, is bad. So it's true we live in the freest, safest, most technologically advanced period in history, but culturally, in tone, we live in an unprecedentedly depraved time in history. There was never another time in history where attitudes like you see today were widespread, were culturally dominant. You could go back to the worst time in the Dark Ages. You could go to the Soviet Union. The attitude was not as evil and corrupt as it is today, here in the West. I mean, even the current attitude of the Middle East and China, even North Korea, the attitude I'm talking about, the ideas of the people, the way they think about things, horrible, false, evil as it is, it does not compare to the nihilism that is currently dominant in the West. Because the mindset in all of those places was antithetical to human life and happiness, but it was for something. It upheld something, even if an impossible future, in the case of communism, or a fictitious afterlife in the case of medieval Europe, or the all-powerful nature of Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, Kim Jong-un, in the case of North Korea. Whereas in the West, there is nothing positive. It is tear everything down. So I'm not comparing the status of life between these places. I'm comparing the attitude of the people in these places. I mean, the people who are allowed to have attitudes before they're killed. So this is the context we're living in. Now, the kind of good news is that this is not stable. Now, throughout history, again, I'm taking this from Dr. Leonard Peikoff's dim hypothesis. Throughout history, whenever you had skepticism, subjectivism, nihilism take hold, whenever a culture reached that point, something else rushed in to fill it. Because nihilism and subjectivism, those are not sustainable ideas. People need answers. That's the bottom line. People need answers. If nobody's offering the right answers, their choice is no answers or wrong answers. And people will take wrong answers over no answers. Because you need something around which to orient your life. You need some principle of integration if you're going to endure. Now, what Kant did with his noumenal phenomenal trickery was to give nihilism an endurance it had never had before. Nonetheless, it has a lifespan, and we are reaching the end of it today. People still need answers. The contradictions involved in the disintegrated worldview are compounding, and it is collapsing in on itself. So what is going to replace it? Now, this is why I always say, Obama is the wave of the past. I mean, to paraphrase him, the future does not belong to Obama. The future is people like Trump. There's nothing that's going to stop that. This is why I don't spend an inordinate amount of time criticizing the left, and I criticize the right more, I think. Although maybe somebody could do an analysis of my content thus far and determine, no, you haven't spent that much time, or here's the breakdown, whatever. The point is, the left is going away, one way or another. So the real question is, what is going to take its place? And to be clear, the left is going away because it doesn't stand for anything. It is for destruction for its own sake. It's nihilism. It's subjectivity. People can't live with that, and they're not going to live with it for much longer. So, what is out there in the way of positive alternatives? Well, you might say objectivism. Well, objectivism's not really out there in the way of positive alternatives. It's not a big enough cultural influence for most people to... It's not on most people's menu. So that's unfortunately probably not where the culture is going, although it is the culture's only hope. And if objectivism does not start to get a bigger role in politics and more than that, just the way people think about things more generally, then Western civilization is doomed, and the world is doomed because the world depends on the atlas that is Western civilization, and Western civilization depends on the atlas that is America. So, let's throw objectivism out, because that's, I'm being realistic here. We're talking about what is most likely to happen. Okay. So what else is out there? Well, Dr. Peikoff believes that religion, Christianity, is the only big enough force to be a plausible alternative to leftist nihilism. Now, I agree with Dr. Peikoff's broad conclusion that some form of intrinsicism, misintegration, some wrong answer out there is going to be what takes over, but I have always disagreed with him on the specifics of what that is going to be. I think religion is dead and is going to stay dead. It is not coming back. We are not going to live in a Christian theocracy. Now, my view has always been that it is going to be some kind of nationalism, racist or otherwise. Now, I thought this long before the alt-right swept into power or cultural prominence, and when it did, my hypothesis made a prediction and the observations matched it. So that's pretty good evidence for the validity of my way of thinking. Now, that's not to say I don't think Christianity or religious groups will have any influence. It will be like Nazi Germany. Religious groups supported Hitler, but that was not the thrust. It was not a Christian movement. And I think that's how it's going to be in the future if a fascist group takes over, which I think is likely. Religious people will support it, but that's not going to be what the ideology is about. The ideology is going to be, the alt-right. Although, I see two things here. You have the racist element and the Christian element. And in the way that Christianity is just too... religion in general is too discredited at this point. Even for people who are sympathetic to it, they consider themselves cultural Christians. It's just too ludicrous to believe in magic today. Given the kinds of influences people have been subjected to. Although, people like Jordan Peterson are trying to bring back magic. He says he doesn't know if magic is possible. He holds open the possibility that Jesus really did come back from the dead. He said this explicitly. I should not get into this because this is just going to lead me down a path that enrages me, although I have some interesting things to say on this, so maybe some other time. But anyway, I think in most people's minds, religion has been too discredited for it to be the leading factor in whatever's coming. At least in the Western world. But then I think the same may be true of racism. I'm not sure the racist element is really going to catch on, but the nationalism, the fascist element, that is catching on because it was always here to an extent, to a large extent. And I think we are going to settle on that what everyone can agree on, religious people, traditional conservatives, the alt-right, two sides of that aren't really super religious, two sides of that aren't really racist, but what they can all agree on, the lowest common denominator here is fascism. It is statist collectivism. Nationalism. Now, just a note about calling this group Nazis. It's possible that the race element does take on a prominence it has not had so far. And that's possible because the group that is confident and new and trending upwards is this Richard Spencer alt-right Nazi ideology. Now, yes, I call it Nazi, even though Richard Spencer objects to that. Now, it's pretty funny to hear Richard Spencer object to anything because he is avowedly irrational. I've heard enough of him to know what he believes. And he says explicitly, the idea of a racial ethno-state is irrational. It resonates with the viscera, not the intellect. It's an irrational urge. He is... Even though he gets upset about being called a Nazi, he is LARPing as a Nazi. I don't think he really even cares about the ideas. I think what he cares about is having a set of ideas as such, because it gives him an identity. You see how obsessed these people are with identity. Now, fascism is not inherently racist. You can have a non-racial fascism. Fascism is it's just statism. It's nominal private property rights We have a system where the government lets individuals hold property in trustee, but reserves the right to hijack it, commandeer it, direct it for the greater good of the state at any moment. Now, if Nazism means anything, it means racist fascism, racist nationalism. Nationalism and fascism are not inherently racist, but they can be. And the best word for that is Nazism. Fascism is just statism. Nazism is statism where the state itself is defined on the basis of race. Whereas fascism is just, there are other standards you can use to define what constitutes the state. Just the people who live here, or who have a certain language, or whatever other superficial BS these primitive-minded people want to use. But the most primitive way to define it is by race, and that is ultimately what everything devolves into if you have the wrong ideas, and that's Nazism. That is statism with the state in turn defined on the basis of race, the white ethno-states. They can complain all they want about how this isn't technically Nazism because of some superficial, non-essential detail here or there, but it is technically Nazism. Having a concept for racial statism, racial nationalism, racial fascism, that is totally valid, and Nazism is that word, is the word that identifies that concept, and everybody treats it that way. Everybody knows that's what it means. So, in the West, you can say that we have the nihilist establishment, and the only major alternative, the only big challenger, is the Nazis, really. The new Nazi movement, the alt-right, the racial nationalists. Now, whether they get their race element in there, I don't know. But some kind of nationalist movement that is not first and foremost religious, I think that is what is the future of the West, leaving out anything else. But this is where Muslims come into the picture. Muslims are the external threat. They are the confident, strong, moral ideology outside of the West that is attacking the West and that is coming into the West. Literally, its people are coming into the West. More in Europe than America, but still. Now, you will know of the alliance between the nihilistic left and Islam. Well, there are reasons for this. And the reasons are that the nihilistic left is nihilistic. They want to destroy everything. And there's a hierarchy of destruction, of course. They want to destroy most whatever is best, or what is part of themselves. So, the West fills both of those categories. First of all, it's better. Racial fascism is trivially different from Islamic theocracy, but the idea is that a Western fascism will have to at least pay lip service to the Enlightenment past. And anything connected with what even just was better, that is enough to determine which side the nihilists want to destroy. And then there's also the fact that the nihilists feel themselves connected to the Western fascists because the nihilists are Western themselves. And of course, suicide is more nihilistic than killing somebody else. So this is why there is an allegiance, because the Muslims are worse, even if only trivially and for superficial reasons, and the nihilistic left wants to destroy what's best. So you have this alliance. So the real question of the future, as I see it, the only thing that makes the future difficult to predict is, it's hard to tell, is the left going to be able to hold the West's hands behind its back long enough for the Muslims to slit our throats, or will a fascist Nazi movement in the West break free of the left, destroy it, and then vanquish the Muslims? That's the real question in my view. Now, once as I say, this is not, it's not important. This is really more academic than anything because, well, I mean, this specific part is academic because it doesn't really matter if we're taken over by Muslims if the alternative is we get taken over by Nazis, because all the horror stories you hear about under Islamic rule, yeah, it's not going to be much better under Nazis. So this is not something you should really be concerned about. Oh, I hope the Nazis win. I hope the fascist movement rises so that we can beat the left and the Muslims, because that's what they call a Pyrrhic victory. Yes, it will have been good to have defeated the Muslims, but you will have lost so much in supporting the Nazis that it won't matter that much. So the only real hope is to support a rational philosophy, and the only one of those is Objectivism. And in politics that means capitalism, which is anti-socialist, anti-racist, all of that. Pro-individual rights, pro-happiness, pro-reason. But anyway, so that's probably not going to happen, although you should still fight for it in a non-sacrificial way. But we're either going to get Nazis or Muslims. That's my view. And things are probably going to go very bad. Now, my view is that the Muslims are so weak and incompetent, and to me it seems really unlikely that they are going to actually overcome the West. The West, with its vestiges of goodness, is just too powerful compared to those primitive desert dwellers. So I think what's most likely to happen is that something like the alt-right comes to power. There's a major push in that direction, or things just, whether that happens or whether we just have this weird stalemate of demographic shifting and becoming more nihilistic, but the ideas turning further to this kind of racial collectivism. I mean, that's what the left is supporting anyway. So I think a lot of these people that the left is importing, they don't understand the implications of the ideas they're spreading, because these people can be turned into fascists quite easily. All it's going to take is for somebody to come along and say, you know what, let's leave out the racist element. Let's unify on national grounds instead of racial grounds. And then all these people you've brought in and taught to be collectivists, they'll be fine with that. And we'll just have one big non-racial but totally fascist unity. That's one possibility. But I think what's going to happen is the US is in for a long, slow decline. Now, there will be major shocks, but, you know, the Roman Empire lasted 1,000 years after it collapsed. We're just going to have a long, slow decline where the Muslims can't destroy us because they're so backwards and incompetent, but we won't destroy them because we are some combination of nihilistic and stupid racist. And so we just let them hurt us forever and we won't destroy them. It's like a Batman Joker thing. You know, Batman won't kill the Joker. Joker can't or won't kill Batman, and they just do that forever. So I think that's what's likely to happen, and then eventually the West will get so weak that it will just dissipate, and we will be in for another Dark Ages, just like what happened after Rome. And then hopefully somebody will discover Atlas Shrugged and rebuild the world on a rational foundation. Hopefully it can happen quicker this time, as people are digging through the rubble and they find a copy of Atlas Shrugged printed on acid-free paper. But as I say, even though the future of the world looks pretty dim, pretty poor, pretty dark. That is not dire from the perspective of your individual life, and I will explain why in next week's episode. So don't go thinking that all hope is lost. It just depends on what kind of hope you're talking about, and the most important thing you should be hoping for is still open to you. So I will talk about that next time. Probably. If you have any questions, you can just send me an email at charles.a.tew@gmail.com. You can also visit my website at charlestew.com. There you can find information on and links to all my work, including ways to support it. Thanks for listening. Let's meet again in episode 31.